Colorado Territory, 1870. The blizzard came without mercy, swallowing the mountainside in a shroud of white so thick that Violet Barstow could no longer distinguish sky from earth. Her hands, numb despite woolen gloves, gripped the reins of her struggling mare as wind howled through the pines like 1,000 lost souls. The schoolteacher's journey to Silver Creek had begun under clear November skies that morning, but nature had betrayed her with the sudden fury only the Rockies could conjure. Just a little further, Penny, she whispered through chapped lips, though she had no idea where shelter might be found. Her new teaching position awaited in Silver Creek, but that hardly mattered if she perished in this godforsaken wilderness. A strange shadow loomed ahead, too angular for a rock formation, too solid for her snow-blinded imagination. A cabin. Hope surged through her frozen limbs as she urged her exhausted horse forward. The structure emerged from the white veil, a sturdy log cabin with smoke curling from its stone chimney. Violet nearly wept at the sight. She stumbled from her saddle, her legs buckling beneath her as she dragged herself to the door. Her knuckles, stiff with cold, rapped feebly against the rough-hewn wood. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the door swung open with such sudden force that she nearly collapsed into the threshold. A man towered before her, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe. Wild auburn hair and a beard framed a face weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of mountain stone that widened at the sight of her. "Help!" she managed before darkness claimed her. Owen Donovan had not spoken more than 20 words to another human being in 6 months, and he preferred it that way. The mountains kept his secrets and asked no questions of the man who had fled civilization after Shiloh. The war had stolen his faith in humanity. Gold fever had given him purpose without companionship. Yet here was civilization, collapsed in a heap of sodden skirts and blue lips on his doorstep. He gathered the woman into his arms, surprised by how light she felt despite her layers of damp clothing. He kicked the door closed against the howling wind and carried her to the bearskin rug before his hearth. "Miss?" He cleared his throat, rusty from disuse. "Miss, can you hear me?" The woman stirred, her eyelids fluttering. She was young, perhaps 5 and 20, with delicate features and hair the color of chestnuts escaping from her bonnet. A lady, far from where any lady ought to be. Her eyes opened fully, a startling shade of amber that reminded Owen of whiskey in sunlight. "Where am I?" she whispered, attempting to sit up. "Careful now," he cautioned, his voice rough. "You're halfway up Thunder Mountain. My cabin. Storm caught you, I reckon." She nodded, teeth chattering. "V. Violet Barstow. I'm the new schoolteacher for Silver Creek. You're a good 10 miles off course, Miss Barstow." Owen moved to stoke the fire. "And not going anywhere tonight." Alarm flashed across her face. "I cannot possibly." "You can and will," he interrupted. "Unless you prefer freezing to death. Storm like this will last 2 days, minimum." Her expression shifted from alarm to resignation as another violent gust rattled the window shutters. "I don't believe I caught your name, sir." He hesitated. Names meant questions, and questions led to pasts better left buried. "Owen Donovan. Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Donovan." Her formal tone struck him as absurdly out of place in his rough cabin. "I assure you I will compensate you for any inconvenience." He almost laughed. What use did he have for money up here? "Your horse is still out there," he said, reaching for his coat. "I'll bring her to the lean-to." Alone for a moment, Violet took in her surroundings. The cabin was small but surprisingly tidy. A cast-iron stove stood opposite the fireplace, with shelves of provisions nearby. A narrow bed occupied one corner, a table and 2 chairs another. Most surprising were the books, dozens of them, stacked neatly on a rough-hewn shelf. What sort of mountain hermit kept a library? The question lingered as Owen stamped back inside, bringing a swirl of snow and cold air with him. "Your mare's settled," he said, hanging his coat on a peg. "Hungry?" Violet nodded, suddenly aware of the hollow ache in her stomach. "Yes, thank you." As Owen moved about the cabin, preparing a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and coffee, Violet studied him covertly. His movements were efficient, his hands large but deft. He seemed accustomed to solitude, speaking only when necessary, yet there was nothing threatening in his manner despite his imposing size. "May I help?" she finally offered, feeling awkward in her idleness. He glanced at her, seeming almost surprised by the question. No need. Coffee's hot if you want some. She accepted a steaming mug gratefully, wrapping her still-cold fingers around its warmth. Do you live here alone, Mr. Donovan? Just Owen, he corrected. And yes. You're a minor? She ventured, noting the tools hanging near the door. Sometimes. His taciturn response made it clear he wasn't interested in elaborating. Violet sipped her coffee, wondering what circumstances had driven this man to such isolation. The Civil War had left many men broken, seeking solace in wilderness rather than society. Perhaps Owen Donovan was one such soul. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the howl of wind and the crackling fire. Finally, Owen set a plate before her. It's not fancy. It's perfect, she assured him, suddenly ravenous. The simple fare tasted better than any restaurant meal she'd had in Boston. They ate without speaking, but Violet was acutely aware of his presence across the small table. When they finished, she insisted on washing the dishes, needing to feel useful. Your clothes need drying, Owen observed as she worked. I've got spare things you can wear. Violet felt heat rise to her cheeks. I couldn't possibly. You'll catch your death in those wet things, he said matter-of-factly. I'll step outside while you change. Before she could protest further, he handed her a flannel shirt and woolen trousers, then grabbed his coat and disappeared into the storm. Propriety warred with practicality as Violet stared at the male garments. Back in Boston, the mere suggestion of a woman donning men's clothing would cause a scandal. But Boston was thousands of miles away, and hypothermia respected no social conventions. When Owen returned, she stood awkwardly by the fire in his clothes, which engulfed her smaller frame. She'd rolled up the sleeves and pant legs, but still felt utterly improper. Something flickered in Owen's eyes, surprise, perhaps amusement, before he quickly looked away. Better. Warmer, she admitted. Thank you. He nodded, hanging his coat. You can take the bed. I'll sleep by the fire. I couldn't possibly displace you. Not up for debate, he interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. Rest. Storm's not letting up anytime soon. As night descended fully, the cabin grew darker, illuminated only by firelight that cast long shadows across the walls. Violet perched on the edge of the narrow bed, watching as Owen arranged blankets on the floor. How long have you lived here? She asked, unable to contain her curiosity. He paused, seeming to weigh his words. 3 years. And before that, his shoulders tensed. Tennessee. Then the war. The war. Those 2 words explain much. I lost my brother at Antietam, she offered quietly. Owen looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. I'm sorry, as am I for whatever losses brought you here. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the stony facade. Sleep well, Miss Barstow, he said, his voice softer than before. Violet, she corrected. If I'm to call you Owen. He nodded once, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Violet. She lay awake long after Owen's breathing had deepened into sleep, listening to the storm rage outside while contemplating the mysterious man who had saved her life. What demons had driven him to this solitary existence? And why did she feel such an inexplicable connection to him after mere hours in his presence? Outside, the blizzard showed no signs of abating, but inside Owen Donovan's cabin, something had begun to thaw. Morning arrived with no respite from the storm. Violet woke to find Owen already up, feeding the fire and brewing coffee. The domestic scene struck her as oddly intimate. This solitary man going about his routine with a stranger in his home. Still coming down hard, he observed, nodding toward the window nearly obscured by snow. Might be stuck here another day. Violet should have felt dismayed at the delay. The school trustees in Silver Creek were expecting her, but found herself strangely untroubled by the prospect of another day in this cabin. I hope they won't worry about me, she said, accepting the coffee he offered. Folks around here are used to weather-changing plans, Owen replied. They'll figure you got held up. As the day progressed, the initial awkwardness between them gradually eased. Owen showed her his small claim operation down by the creek, explained through maps how she'd strayed from the main trail to Silver Creek, and even revealed a chess set carved from pine and aspen wood. Did you make this? Violet asked, admiring the craftsmanship of the pieces. Winter's long up here. Keeps the hands busy. Will you teach me? I never learned to play. Something like pleasure flickered across his features. Not much to teach. Game of strategy, that's all. But there was much to teach, and Owen proved a patient instructor. As they played by firelight, Violet observed the transformation in him, how animation crept into his voice when explaining a particularly clever move, how the hardness in his eyes softened when she made a good play. "Checkmate," he announced as darkness fell outside. "Not bad for your first game." "You let me capture half your pieces," she accused with a smile. He shrugged, but his eyes held a warmth that hadn't been there that morning. Maybe. Their gazes held for a moment too long before Owen cleared his throat and began resetting the board. "How does a Boston lady end up teaching in a mining town?" he asked, surprising her with the personal question. Violet considered her answer carefully. "After my brother died, there seemed little reason to stay. My parents were gone. The family home sold to pay debts." She traced a finger along the edge of the chessboard. Teaching positions out west offered independence. Adventure, perhaps. Silver Creek's hardly an adventure, just a rough mining town. And yet, here I am, stranded in a blizzard with a mountain man. I'd call that an adventure. Her teasing tone elicited another almost smile from Owen. "Fair point." He hesitated before asking, "Why teaching?" "I believe education changes lives," she said simply, "even in rough mining towns." Owen studied her with an intensity that might have made her uncomfortable from another man. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd faint at the sight of a man's trousers." His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Or demand rescue parties and proper accommodations." Violet laughed, the sound bright in the quiet cabin. "I was raised with certain expectations of propriety, yes. But my father always said I had more practicality than was fashionable for a young lady." "Your father was right." The simple affirmation warmed her more than it should have. As they continued talking into the night, Violet learned fragments of Owen's story, how he'd fought for the Union despite his Tennessee upbringing, how he'd come west after Shiloh with nightmares that whiskey couldn't drown, how the mountains had offered solace when civilization became unbearable. He didn't speak of the worst of it, but Violet could see the shadows that crossed his face when he mentioned certain names or places. She understood loss intimately enough to recognize its marks on others. "The quiet helps," he admitted, staring into the fire. "Up here, there's no one expecting anything of you. No judgments." "But isn't it lonely?" she asked gently. His eyes met hers, vulnerable for the first time. "Sometimes. But loneliness seems a fair trade for peace." Violet wondered if he truly believed that, or if it was what he told himself to justify his isolation. Before she could respond, a particularly violent gust shook the cabin, sending a shower of snow down the chimney that hissed in the flames. Owen rose to check the shutters, and the moment of intimacy passed. Yet something had shifted between them, a connection formed through shared confidences in the isolation of the storm. That night, as Violet lay in Owen's bed listening to his steady breathing across the room, she realized with startling clarity that she would remember this unexpected interlude for the rest of her life. The thought both comforted and unsettled her as she drifted into sleep. The blizzard finally broke the following afternoon, leaving a transformed landscape of pristine white draped over every surface. Sunlight glittered off the snow with a brightness that hurt the eyes after days of storm darkness. "Trail should be passable by tomorrow morning," Owen observed as they stood in the doorway, surveying the changed world. "I'll get you to Silver Creek." Violet felt an unexpected pang at his words. Their forced companionship would end, and this man would return to his solitude while she began her new life in town. The realization left her with a hollow sensation she couldn't quite name. "Thank you," she said, inadequate words for what she truly felt. "For everything." He nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Need to check the lean-to roof. Snow's heavy." As he trudged through knee-deep drifts toward the small structure housing her horse, Violet returned inside and began gathering her now-dry clothing. The familiar garments seemed to belong to another life, one that no longer fit quite right. That evening held a certain melancholy, their conversations more subdued as tomorrow's parting loomed. Owen taught her another chess game, but his attention seemed divided, his responses shorter than before. "Will you come to Silver Creek sometimes?" Violet asked as they put away the chess pieces. "For supplies, perhaps?" "Rarely," he admitted. "I stock up before winter sets in." "But surely you need things throughout the year." He shrugged. "I manage." The implication was clear. He had no intention of maintaining contact once she reached her destination. Why should he? They were strangers thrown together by circumstance, nothing more. Yet as Violet prepared for sleep on her final night in the cabin, she couldn't suppress the feeling that something important was slipping through her fingers, something she couldn't quite identify, but sensed was precious. Owen sat by the fire long after Violet had retired, his thoughts in turmoil. 3 years of carefully constructed solitude had been upended in 2 days by a woman with amber eyes and uncommon courage. Tomorrow, he would restore order to his existence. Tomorrow, his cabin would return to silence. He told himself it was better this way. Morning dawned clear and cold. They prepared for the journey mostly in silence. Owen showing Violet how to wrap her boots in rabbit fur for better traction in the deep snow. It's about 3 hours to Silver Creek, he explained, saddling her mare. Trail's clear enough if you know where to look. And you're certain you won't stay even one night in town? Violet asked, watching him work. To rest before returning? Owen shook his head. Better to get back before dark. She nodded, understanding it wasn't really about daylight. Towns meant people, questions, memories. Everything he'd fled to the mountains to escape. As they set out, Owen leading on foot, breaking trail through the snow while Violet followed on horseback. The crisp mountain air filled her lungs with renewed energy. The wilderness was beautiful beyond description, sunlight catching on snow-laden branches and transforming ordinary pines into crystalline sculptures. It's like a fairy tale, she breathed, taking in the vista before them. Owen glanced back, something softening in his expression. It has its moments. They traveled steadily downward, the path sometimes visible, sometimes discernible only to Owen's experienced eye. He moved with the sure-footedness of a man intimately familiar with the terrain, occasionally reaching up to help guide Violet's horse around a particularly treacherous section. Each time his hand touched hers, even through gloves, Violet felt a curious warmth spread through her chest. By midday, when they stopped in a sheltered clearing to rest and eat the provisions Owen had packed, she found herself inventing reasons to prolong their journey. Tell me about Silver Creek, she requested as they shared jerky and hard bread. What should I expect? Rough town, but not lawless, Owen replied. About 200 souls when the mines are running full. 1 church, 1 school, 2 saloons. He hesitated. Decent folks, most of them. The widow Sullivan runs a boarding house where most single ladies stay. You know more about town than you let on, Violet observed with a slight smile. A faint flush colored his cheeks beneath his beard. I listen when I do go in. The knowledge that he wasn't completely detached from civilization gave Violet a strange hope. Perhaps Silver Creek wouldn't be the end of their acquaintance after all. As they resumed their journey, the trail widened and showed signs of recent travel. They were nearing civilization. Violet felt both eager and reluctant. Eager to begin her new position, reluctant to bid farewell to the man who had saved her life and shared his solitude. There, Owen finally said, pointing to smoke rising in the distance. Silver Creek. The town appeared small and haphazard, a collection of wooden structures huddled against the mountainside. Mining equipment dotted the landscape, and the sound of distant hammering carried on the clear air. Owen stopped at the edge of a pine grove, still a quarter-mile from the first buildings. This is where we part ways. Violet turned to him, dismay evident in her expression. You won't even accompany me into town? He shook his head. No need. Road's clear from here, and you can see the school, there, with the bell tower. Widow Sullivan's is the blue house beside it. She bit her lip, fighting unexpected emotion. How can I thank you properly for saving my life? No thanks needed. His voice was gruff, his gaze fixed somewhere past her shoulder. Just doing what anyone would. We both know that's not true. Violet gathered her courage. Will I see you again, Owen Donovan? For a long moment, he was silent, his expression unreadable. Then, spring thaw might bring me down for supplies. It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a rejection either. Violet nodded, trying to hide her disappointment at such a vague commitment. Then I shall hope for an early spring. She extended her gloved hand, which he took briefly in his own. The formal gesture seemed woefully inadequate for the connection they had formed, yet anything more would be improper. Safe journey, Violet Barstow, he said, his voice softer than usual. And to you, Owen Donovan. With one last look at the man who had sheltered her from the storm, Violet urged her mare forward towards Silver Creek and her new life, feeling as though she were leaving something vital behind in the snow-covered forest. Owen watched until she disappeared around the bend, then turned back toward the mountains, telling himself the heaviness in his chest was merely fatigue from breaking trail. Silver Creek welcomed its new schoolteacher with curious enthusiasm. The town had been without formal education for nearly 6 months, and children ran wild while parents worried about their futures. Violet's arrival, dramatic as it was, emerging from a blizzard days late, only added to her mystique. Widow Sullivan, a robust woman with iron-gray hair and kind eyes, took Violet under her wing immediately. "Land's sakes, girl, we thought you'd frozen solid somewhere between here and Denver," she exclaimed, ushering Violet into the warmth of her boarding house. "How on earth did you survive that storm?" "A kind gentleman sheltered me," Violet explained, deciding discretion was the better part of valor regarding the specific details. "A Mr. Donovan who lives in the mountains." The widow's eyebrows shot up. "Owen Donovan, the hermit." She let out a low whistle. "Well, that's a tale worth telling. Man hardly speaks 2 words when he comes to town, which ain't but twice yearly at most. He was very hospitable," Violet said carefully. "I'll bet he was surprised to find a pretty young thing on his doorstep." The widow chuckled. "Probably the first female face he's seen in months." Violet felt a blush creeping up her neck. "He was a perfect gentleman." "Oh, I don't doubt it. Donovan keeps to himself, but he's got a reputation for fairness. Helped the Petersons when their boy got lost last summer, and wouldn't take a cent for it." Mrs. Sullivan showed Violet to a small but comfortable room on the 2nd floor. "Folks say he was some kind of hero in the war, though he never speaks of it." This new information about Owen intrigued Violet. A hero? It would explain the haunted look that sometimes shadowed his eyes, the need for solitude to escape whatever horrors he had witnessed. The following days passed in a blur of activity as Violet acquainted herself with the school and its 30-odd pupils ranging from 5 to 16 years of age. The schoolhouse was crude but functional, with a pot-bellied stove, rough-hewn desks, and precious few books. The challenge energized her. Here was work that truly mattered. Yet even as she threw herself into teaching, organizing, and becoming part of the community, thoughts of Owen Donovan frequently intruded. On clear days, she found herself gazing toward the mountains, wondering what he was doing in his solitary cabin. When storms blew through the valley, she worried about his welfare, though logic told her he had survived many winters alone. "You're mooning again, Miss Barstow," Mrs. Sullivan observed one evening in late January as they sat by the fire. "And I'd wager it ain't the school books you're thinking about." Violet startled. "I was merely planning tomorrow's lessons." "With your eyes fixed on Thunder Mountain?" "I think not." The widow's tone was gentle despite her teasing. "You wouldn't be the first girl to fall for a mountain man, though Donovan's an unusual case." "I hardly know the man," Violet protested. "He simply helped me in my time of need." "And yet you watch for him every time a stranger comes to town." Mrs. Sullivan's knowing smile made further denial pointless. "Spring's coming early this year, if the signs are right. Perhaps your mountain man will come down with the thaw." Violet said nothing, but her heart quickened at the thought. February gave way to March, and as Mrs. Sullivan had predicted, the weather began to warm unusually early. Snow melted from the valley, leaving mud and the first tentative shoots of green in its wake. The mountains remained snow-capped, but the trails became passable for experienced travelers. Violet tried not to watch the road from town too obviously, but each day brought fresh hope that Owen might appear. When weeks passed with no sign of him, she told herself firmly that she was being foolish. The man had made no promises, and their brief acquaintance hardly warranted such anticipation. Yet something in her heart refused to accept this logical conclusion. The connection they had formed during those snowbound days felt significant in a way she couldn't explain, as if fate had orchestrated their meeting for purposes yet unrevealed. "Miss Barstow," a small voice interrupted her reverie one April afternoon as she sat on the schoolhouse steps after dismissing her pupils. She looked up to find Timothy Peterson, a freckle-faced 10-year-old, shifting from foot to foot before her. "Yes, Timothy? Pa says to tell you we saw Mr. Donovan at Peterson's trading post this morning. Thought you might want to know." Violet's heart leapt, but she maintained a composed expression. "Thank you for letting me know. I should like to thank him properly for his assistance during the blizzard." Timothy nodded solemnly. Pa says he probably won't stay in town long. He never does. Armed with this intelligence, Violet hurried back to the boarding house to change her teaching clothes for something more suitable for a social call. Mrs. Sullivan watched with knowing eyes but made no comment as Violet selected her blue calico dress and pinned her hair more carefully than usual. Peterson's trading post stood at the town's northern edge, closest to the trail that led up to the higher elevations. It was the natural first stop for anyone coming down from the mountains, offering supplies, mail service, and the latest news. Violet approached with uncharacteristic nervousness, smoothing her skirts and taking a deep breath before pushing open the door. The bell jingled cheerfully, announcing her arrival to the handful of people inside the cluttered establishment. Her eyes found him immediately, that broad-shouldered figure unmistakable even from behind as he stood at the counter examining supplies. Her heart performed a curious little stumble in her chest. "Mr. Donovan," she called softly. Owen turned, surprise registering on his features before he could mask it. He had trimmed his beard somewhat, Violet noticed, but otherwise looked much the same, perhaps a little leaner after the winter months. "Miss Barstow," he acknowledged with a nod. Something flickered in his gray eyes. "Pleasure? Uncertainty? How fortunate to find you in town," she said, crossing to where he stood. "I've hoped for an opportunity to thank you properly for your kindness during the blizzard." Owen shifted, clearly uncomfortable with gratitude. "No need." Mr. Peterson, a jovial man with a shopkeeper's intuition, suddenly remembered urgent business in his storeroom, leaving them relatively alone among the barrels and shelves. "Are you well?" Violet asked, searching Owen's face. "The winter treated you kindly?" "Well enough." He hesitated, then added, "The town suits you. Heard good things about the school since you came." The knowledge that he had inquired about her warmed Violet immeasurably. "I found it rewarding, though challenging at times. The children are eager to learn." An awkward silence fell between them. There were so many things Violet wished to say, yet the trading post hardly seemed the place for heartfelt confessions. "Will you be in town long?" she finally asked. Owen shook his head. "Just for supplies. Heading back today." Disappointment washed over her. "I see." He must have noticed her crestfallen expression, for he added, "Need to check my claim before the spring runoff. Might be back in a week or so." Hope resurged. "Perhaps you would consider dining at the boarding house when you return? Mrs. Sullivan sets an excellent table, and she faltered briefly, "I would enjoy the opportunity to speak with you further." Owen studied her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. What was he searching for in her face? "Might do that," he finally said, his voice rough. It wasn't the enthusiastic acceptance she might have wished for, but Violet recognized it as significant coming from this taciturn man. "Wonderful. I look forward to it." Before he could respond, the shop bell jangled again as several miners entered, their loud voices shattering the moment. Owen nodded once more to Violet before returning to his supplies, effectively ending their conversation. Violet departed with mixed emotions, joy at seeing him again, disappointment at the brevity of their exchange, and hope that his promised return would allow for more meaningful interaction. True to his word, Owen reappeared in Silver Creek the following week. This time, he came directly to the widow Sullivan's boarding house, hat in hand, looking distinctly uncomfortable on the neat front porch. Violet, alerted to his arrival by Mrs. Sullivan's knowing smile, met him at the door with undisguised pleasure. "You came," said I would. He replied simply, "Indeed you did." She ushered him inside, acutely aware of curious eyes from the other boarders. "Mrs. Sullivan has prepared a special dinner in your honor." "No need for special treatment," he protested, but allowed himself to be guided to the dining room. The meal passed pleasantly, with Mrs. Sullivan carrying much of the conversation through her cheerful inquiries about mountain conditions and local mining prospects. Owen answered politely if briefly, his eyes frequently straying to Violet across the table. After dinner, Violet suggested a walk, eager for privacy after the well-meaning but intrusive company of the other boarders. Owen agreed with what appeared to be relief. The spring evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and new growth. They strolled toward the small town park, a generous term for what was essentially a grassy area with a few benches near the church. "You seem to have settled well," Owen observed as they walked side by side, a respectable distance between them. "I have," Violet confirmed. "The community has been most welcoming, and the work is fulfilling." Good. That's good. They lapsed into silence, but unlike their previous awkward pause at the trading post, this quiet felt companionable. They reached the park and sat on a bench overlooking the valley, the mountains rising majestically in the distance. I can see your mountain from my schoolhouse window, Violet admitted. I find myself looking toward it often, wondering how you fare. Owen's expression softened in the fading light. Been a mild spring. Is that all you have to say? The question escaped before Violet could consider its boldness. After I've thought of you nearly every day since we parted? Owen stared at her, clearly taken aback by her frankness. Violet herself was shocked by her own words, but they had been spoken and could not be retracted. What would you have me say? He finally asked, his voice low. The truth. Did our time together mean nothing to you? Am I a foolish woman to feel a connection between us? Owen stood abruptly and took several steps away, his back to her as he gazed toward the mountains. For a terrible moment, Violet thought he might simply walk away without answering. It meant something, he finally said, still facing away. More than it should have. Violet rose and moved to stand beside him, careful not to touch him. Why should have? He turned to her then, his expression pained. Look at me, Violet. I'm not fit for society. I live alone in the mountains because that's where I belong after what I've seen. What I've done. The war, she asked gently. He nodded once. Among other things. Mrs. Sullivan says you were a hero. A harsh laugh escaped him. No heroes in that war. Just men killing other men for causes that got less clear with every battle. Then what keeps you in isolation? The memories. Owen's gaze was haunted. Partly. But also knowing I don't belong in places like this anymore. Can't sleep in a proper bed. Can't abide crowds or noise. Can't make pleasant conversation about nothing. He gestured toward the town. These people see a mountain man, maybe an eccentric veteran. They don't see what's really there. And what is really there? Owen Donovan. Violet asked softly. A broken man, he answered with brutal honesty. One who wakes shouting in the night. One who came west because he couldn't face the families of the men who died under his command. One who found that gold fever gives purpose without requiring peace of mind. Violet absorbed his words, understanding better now the demons that drove him to solitude. Yet you saved me without hesitation. You shared your home, your food, your companionship. That was different. How? He struggled visibly with his answer. You needed help. Simple as that. Is it? I think perhaps you needed company as much as I needed shelter, though neither of us knew it at the time. Violet took a risk and laid her hand gently on his arm. The man I came to know in that cabin was kind, intelligent, and honorable. Whatever burdens you carry from the past, they don't define who you are to me. Owen looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then up to her face with an expression of mingled wonder and skepticism. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Violet met his gaze steadily. I'm saying that in those 2 days, something changed for me. I'm saying that despite all logic and propriety, I find myself caring deeply for a man who lives on a mountain and speaks only when necessary. For a long moment, Owen was silent, searching her face as if looking for deception. Finally, he covered her hand with his own, a small gesture, but significant. I've thought of you too, he admitted roughly. More than I should. The simple confession sent warmth flooding through Violet's chest. Then perhaps we should explore what that might mean. Owen's brow furrowed. I can't offer what other men might. No fine house, no social standing. Just a cabin and a small claim. I'm not asking for those things. Violet squeezed his arm gently. I'm asking for a chance to know you better. The rest can be determined with time. Something like hope kindled in his eyes, quickly tempered by caution. The town would talk. Let them. I've never much cared for gossip. Her smile held a hint of mischief. Besides, a respectable schoolteacher befriending a local miner is hardly scandalous. We need merely observe the proprieties. A reluctant smile tugged at Owen's mouth, the first true smile Violet had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and revealing a glimpse of the man he might have been before war and hardship carved him into this solitary figure. You're a stubborn woman, Violet Barstow. So my father always said. She withdrew her hand, mindful of propriety despite her brave words about gossip. Will you call on me again before returning to your mountain? Owen nodded, the decision apparently made. I'll be in town 2 more days. As they walked back toward the boarding house in the gathering twilight, something shifted between them, a tentative bridge spanning the gulf of their different worlds. Whether it would bear weight remained to be seen, but Violet felt light with possibility for the first time since that snowy day when fate had led her to Owen's door. The following weeks established a pattern neither had anticipated. Owen began making regular trips to Silver Creek, ostensibly to sell his modest findings and purchase supplies, but increasingly to spend time with Violet. Their courtship, for that was what the town quickly recognized it to be, despite Owen's reticence and Violet's discretion, progressed with cautious steps. They walked together on Sunday afternoons when weather permitted. Owen occasionally attended church services, sitting stiffly in the back pew in clothes that had clearly been brushed and mended for the occasion. Violet introduced him to her students during a lesson on gold panning, where his practical knowledge transformed a dry subject into an adventure. Each interaction revealed new facets of the man behind the mountain hermit. Violet discovered Owen had been educated at a small college in Tennessee before the war, that he could quote Shakespeare from memory, that he possessed a dry wit that emerged rarely but delightfully. Owen, in turn, found himself gradually reacquainted with social interactions he had abandoned years before. The nightmares still came, but less frequently. The mountains still called to him, but now with a different promise, not merely escape, but a beauty he increasingly wished to share. By late May, when wildflowers carpeted the valley and the last snow had retreated to the highest peaks, Owen had become a familiar, if still somewhat mysterious, figure in Silver Creek. Children called greetings to him. Shopkeepers saved items they thought might interest him, and Mrs. Sullivan always kept a place at her table when he came to town. "You've worked a miracle, my dear," the widow told Violet one evening as they watched Owen split kindling in the backyard, a task he had volunteered for despite her protests. "That man was half wild when you met him." "No miracle," Violet demurred. "Just patience and understanding. Call it what you will, but love has a way of healing what medicine cannot." Mrs. Sullivan patted her hand knowingly. "The question now is what happens next." Indeed, that question increasingly occupied Violet's thoughts. She had signed a one-year contract with the school board, with the option to renew for the following term. Summer would bring a 2-month break from teaching, time that stretched before her with undefined possibility. Owen, for his part, seemed content with their current arrangement, though Violet sometimes caught him looking at her with an intensity that suggested deeper feelings than he expressed. Their physical contact remained limited to the occasional brush of hands or assistance over rough terrain during their walks, propriety observed even as their emotional connection deepened. The turning point came unexpectedly in early June, when a mining accident trapped 3 men in a collapsed shaft outside town. Owen, happening to be in Silver Creek that day, joined the rescue effort without hesitation, his experience in tunnel work proving invaluable. Violet waited anxiously with the other townspeople as hours stretched into the night, prayers and whispered fears mingling in the tense atmosphere. When the rescuers finally emerged at dawn, filthy and exhausted but with all 3 miners alive, Owen was among the heroes of the hour. The town's gratitude manifested in a celebration that weekend, a communal picnic with music, dancing, and enough food to feed twice the population. Owen attended reluctantly, uncomfortable with the attention but unwilling to disappoint Violet. "May I have this dance?" she asked as fiddles struck up a lively tune in the town square. Owen hesitated, eyeing the forming sets with evident discomfort. "I haven't danced since before the war." "Then it's high time you remembered how." Violet took his hand boldly. "I'll guide you through it." To her surprise and delight, Owen allowed himself to be led into the dance. His movements were stiff at first, but muscle memory gradually returned as they circled with the other couples. By the end of the set, he was moving with unexpected grace for such a large man. "You lied about needing guidance," Violet accused playfully as they caught their breath afterward. "You dance very well." A hint of color touched Owen's cheeks. "My mother insisted all her sons learn properly. Said no Donovan would embarrass her at social gatherings. She taught you well." Violet accepted a cup of lemonade from a passing tray. "Would she have approved of me, do you think?" The question slipped out unplanned, revealing more of her thoughts than she had intended. Owen looked at her sharply, surprise evident in his expression. "She would have adored you," he said after a moment, his voice rough with emotion. "Said I was too stubborn for my own good." Needed someone equally determined to balance me. The simple statement, more revealing than any he had yet made about his feelings, warmed Violet to her core. And what do you think, Owen Donovan? Do I balance you? His gray eyes held her steadily. You make me remember things I thought were gone forever. Make me want things I'd given up on. What things? Instead of answering, Owen glanced around at the crowded square, then took her hand. Walk with me. They slipped away from the celebration, finding a quiet path along the creek that gave the town its name. The late afternoon sun filtered through cottonwood leaves, dappling the ground with shifting patterns of light and shadow. When they reached a secluded bend, Owen stopped and turned to face Violet, still holding her hand. His expression was serious, almost solemn. I'm not good with words, he began. You do better than you think, she encouraged. He shook his head. Not for this. Not for saying that meeting you was the best thing that's happened to me since before the war. That you make me want to be better than I am. That I think of you every moment we're apart. Violet's heart quickened at his halting declaration. Owen, let me finish, he interrupted gently. I know I can't offer what you deserve. My life is rough, my prospects modest. But I can offer honesty, loyalty, and a heart that, against all odds, seems to remember how to love. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, holding it out in his palm. A ring, simple but exquisitely crafted from gold he had undoubtedly mined himself, set with a small but flawless sapphire. I made this, he said quietly. Been carrying it for weeks, looking for courage. Violet stared at the ring, then at Owen's face, her vision blurring with unexpected tears. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Violet Barstow, would you consider becoming my wife? Not now. I know there's your teaching contract, and we'd need a proper home, not my cabin as it stands. The words tumbled out faster now. But someday, when I've built something worthy of you. Joy rose in Violet's chest, bright and overwhelming. Oh, Owen. Yes, I would consider it. More than consider it. His expression transformed, hope and disbelief warring in his features. You're certain? It won't be an easy life. The best things rarely are. She stepped closer, propriety momentarily forgotten. And I don't need a grand home or possessions. I need you. Owen's hand trembled slightly as he took hers and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching the sunlight with a flash of blue fire. We'll wait until your contract ends, he said, his voice steadier now. Give me time to expand the cabin, make it proper for a lady. And for you to be certain. I am already certain, Violet assured him. But I agree we should wait until my obligations are fulfilled. The children deserve that much. Owen nodded, then, with a hesitancy that touched her deeply, raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles just above the ring. The gesture, so restrained yet so intimate, made Violet's heart flutter. There will be talk, he warned, still holding her hand. Violet smiled. There already is. Let them talk. We know the truth of what lies between us. As they returned to the celebration, Violet wearing Owen's ring and a happiness no gossip could diminish, both recognized that their lives had irrevocably changed course. The lonely mountain man had opened his door to more than just a teacher lost in a storm. He had opened his heart to possibilities long abandoned. Summer brought changes both to the landscape and to Owen's mountain cabin. With Violet's encouragement and occasional assistance during her school break, he set about transforming his bachelor dwelling into a home that could comfortably accommodate a wife. The single room expanded to include a proper bedroom, separated by a wall for privacy. A second window brightened the main living area, and shelves appeared for Violet's books and personal belongings. Owen crafted furniture with the same care he had shown with his chess set. A rocking chair, a larger table with 4 chairs instead of 2, a chest of drawers with delicately carved handles. Their engagement became official when Owen spoke with Reverend Clark about performing a ceremony in the autumn, after the school term ended. The news spread through Silver Creek with predictable excitement. Weddings were always cause for celebration in frontier communities, and this particular union struck many as especially romantic. The schoolmarm and the mountain man, Mrs. Sullivan declared with satisfaction. Sounds like one of those dime novels the miners are always reading. Violet merely smiled at such comments. What existed between her and Owen transcended simple categorization or romantic cliches. They had found in each other unexpected complements to their own natures, her social grace tempering his isolation, his self-sufficiency balancing her theoretical knowledge, both united by intelligence, determination, and growing love. As September approached, bringing with it the conclusion of Violet's teaching contract and their planned wedding, nature intervened once more in their lives, this time not with a blizzard, but with its opposite. A summer of unusual heat and little rain had left the forests dangerously dry. When lightning struck the western slope of Thunder Mountain in early September, the resulting fire spread with frightening speed, driven by winds that carried embers for miles. Silver Creek organized bucket brigades to protect the town, while those with properties in the foothills evacuated to safety. Owen, who had been staying in town more frequently as their wedding approached, watched with mounting concern as the smoke plume above his mountain home grew larger. "My cabin's in the path," he told Violet grimly as they stood with other townspeople, watching the distant flames. "Everything we've built this summer." Violet squeezed his hand. "Buildings can be replaced. You are what matters." His expression softened briefly at her words before hardening with resolve. "There's still time to save it if I go now. I know routes the fire won't take." "Absolutely not," Violet protested, alarm sharpening her voice. "It's too dangerous. I know that mountain better than anyone." Owen's tone brooked no argument. "And there are things there I won't lose without trying. Your mother's locket you left last visit, the wedding quilt Mrs. Sullivan helped you make. Those are just objects, Owen. They're our beginning." He cupped her face gently. "Trust me, I'll be careful." Before she could argue further, he pressed a kiss to her forehead, their first public display of affection, and strode toward the livery stable to secure a horse. Violet watched him go with a terrible feeling of déjà vu. Once before, she had been separated from Owen by nature's fury. This time, however, she was not helpless. "Mrs. Sullivan," she called, turning to the widow who stood nearby. "I need your help." 2 hours later, Violet urged her mare up the eastern trail to Thunder Mountain, a route less direct, but hopefully safer than the western approach Owen would have taken. Mrs. Sullivan had tried to dissuade her, but ultimately helped her prepare, understanding that love sometimes required action rather than patience. The smoke grew thicker as Violet climbed higher, her horse increasingly nervous beneath her. She tied a damp cloth over her nose and mouth, her eyes stinging despite her protective efforts. The familiar landscape appeared alien through the haze, landmarks distorted or obscured entirely. She pressed on, driven by fear for Owen and determination to reach him. The fire's main front seemed to be on the mountain's opposite side, but wind-driven embers had started spot fires throughout the forest. Several times, Violet had to detour around patches of burning underbrush or fallen trees. When she finally crested the ridge that should have provided a view of Owen's cabin, her heart sank. The valley below was obscured by thick smoke, punctuated by the orange glow of active flames. The fire had moved faster than anyone predicted. "Owen," she called, her voice lost in the roar of the distant blaze and the crackle of burning pine. For agonizing minutes, Violet hesitated at the ridgeline, torn between proceeding into obvious danger and retreating to safety. Then, through a momentary thinning of smoke, she glimpsed movement in the valley below, a figure leading a horse, moving away from where the cabin should be, toward a small creek that might offer protection. "Owen," she called again, louder this time. Whether he heard or merely saw her silhouette against the sky, the figure changed direction, heading toward her position. Violet dismounted, tying her nervous mare to a boulder well back from the ridge's edge. Then she began picking her way downslope, using a handkerchief to cover her mouth against the thickening smoke. They met halfway, Owen climbing up, Violet coming down, finding each other through some instinct stronger than visibility. His face was streaked with soot, his clothes singed in places, but his gray eyes blazed with a mixture of relief and anger when he recognized her. "What in God's name are you doing here?" he demanded, grasping her shoulders as if to assure himself she was real. "I couldn't wait in town while you might be in danger," she answered simply. "Not when I love you." It was the first time either had spoken those precise words aloud. Even through fear and smoke and danger, they registered, transforming Owen's expression from anger to a complex emotion beyond naming. "The cabin?" she asked, already knowing the answer from his appearance and the items strapped to his horse. "Gone," he confirmed grimly. "Got there just as the roof caught." managed to retrieve some things before it was fully engulfed. Violet nodded, blinking back tears that had nothing to do with smoke. All their summer's work, their preparations for a shared life, consumed by flame. "We need to move," Owen urged, glancing over his shoulder at the advancing fire line. "This whole side of the mountain's going to burn before night falls." They made their way carefully back to where Violet had left her mare, then began the treacherous descent towards Silver Creek, choosing paths that offered the best protection from both fire and falling debris. Owen kept one hand on Violet's reins, unwilling to risk separation in the hazardous conditions. They had nearly reached the relative safety of the lower elevations when a massive pine, its roots weakened by fire, toppled across their path with a thunderous crash. Violet's mare reared in terror, throwing her to the ground before bolting downhill. "Violet!" Owen was at her side instantly, his face pale beneath the soot as he knelt beside her. "I'm all right," she assured him, though pain lanced through her ankle when she tried to stand. "Just twisted my ankle in the fall." Owen's relief was palpable. He helped her to his horse, lifting her into the saddle before mounting behind her, one arm securely around her waist. "Hold tight," he murmured against her ear as they continued their descent at a careful pace, the heat of the fire diminishing as they put distance between themselves and the burning mountain. By the time they reached Silver Creek, night had fallen, casting the town in the eerie orange glow of the distant wildfire. Their arrival caused immediate commotion, Mrs. Sullivan rushing forward with cries of relief, others gathering around with questions and exclamations. Through it all, Owen kept Violet close, his protective stance making clear that whatever possessions the fire had claimed, he had saved what mattered most. The following days brought both devastation and renewal. The fire eventually burned itself out after consuming thousands of acres, including Owen's claim and cabin. Yet from this destruction arose unexpected opportunity when Mr. Peterson offered Owen partnership in his expanding trading business, a position that would allow him to utilize his knowledge of the mountains while remaining in Silver Creek. "You don't have to accept," Violet told him as they sat on the boarding house porch discussing the proposal. "I know how much the mountain means to you." Owen was silent for a long moment, his gaze on the scarred landscape visible in the distance. "The mountain will recover," he finally said. "And so will we, but perhaps in different ways than we planned." He turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. "I've been fighting against civilization since the war ended, convinced I couldn't belong. Maybe it's time to stop fighting." Violet covered his hand with hers. "Whatever you decide, wherever we live, we'll face it together." His fingers intertwined with hers, the simple contact conveying more than words. "Peterson's offer is a good one. We could build a home here in town, be part of the community." A faint smile touched his lips. "Might even get used to sleeping in a proper bed again." The decision made, events moved swiftly. Owen accepted the partnership, and construction began on a modest house near the schoolhouse. Their wedding, delayed by the fire, was rescheduled for late October, when the aspen leaves would turn gold against the backdrop of snow-dusted peaks. On their wedding day, as Violet walked toward Owen in the small church filled with townspeople who had become friends, she remembered their first meeting, a half-frozen stranger collapsing on a hermit's doorstep. How improbable that such a beginning would lead to this moment, yet how perfectly right it felt. Owen watched her approach, his gray eyes suspiciously bright, his expression one of wonder and profound gratitude. When she reached him, he took her hands in his with a gentleness that belied his strength. "You look beautiful," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Violet smiled up at him, seeing not just the man before her, but the journey that had brought them together. A blizzard, a cabin, chess games by firelight, a spring that had thawed more than just mountain snow. "I love you," she replied simply. As Reverend Clark began the ceremony, Violet thought of the title of one of her students' composition assignments, "How Unexpected Journeys Change Our Lives." Indeed, her journey had changed everything, leading her not only to a new town and profession, but to a love that had transformed a lonely mountain man's heart as surely as spring transforms winter's barren landscape. When Owen slipped a ring onto her finger, a new one to replace that lost in the fire, and promised to love, honor, and cherish her all the days of his life, Violet knew with absolute certainty that some storms bring not destruction, but the most precious gifts imaginable. And as they sealed their vows with a kiss, while Silver Creek's residents erupted in cheers and applause, the once solitary man who had opened his door to a teacher lost in a storm embraced not just his bride, but the community and future he had never imagined could be his.